Two of the times that I attempted suicide, I wanted to die. I felt that that was my only way out of the situations that I was in.
Teenagers in trouble. An early sign society's in trouble. Young people are often the first to feel the undercurrents of change.
Michael was crying for help in many ways, and all of his life was a kind of cry for help.
People shy away from the implications of young suicide. Some of the youngest are still recorded as accidental death. And yet in our society, suicide is second only to accidents as the major cause of death for people under 25.
It felt like there were constantly obstacles. You know, you'd get through this door and then there were more doors. And I got tired of opening the doors.
It's ironic that in a society that offers so many possibilities to young people, the only choice that many can see is suicide. Now, each year, at least 6,000 to 8,000 young North Americans take their own lives. Michael was just 18 when he hanged himself. His two closest friends still can't quite understand why he died.
He was a person of great vitality and energy and generosity, and he was a great friend.
The three of us went around together a lot. He was a very good friend of both of us. We spent a lot of time together, whether it was on the phone or sitting in restaurants, just walking around, talking.
My memory of him was as a very curious, inquisitive sort of fellow. He was interested in all variety of things, from mathematics to physics to philosophy, religion, although he was repulsed by thought of organized religion. He had some sort of fear of it, but he was fascinated by everything, by the world.
Michael's mother still sorts through her memories, looking for clues.
As a baby, Michael was very energetic. In those days, they didn't talk about hyperactive children, but I suppose now he would have been called a hyperactive child. He always wanted to be good. That seemed to be an important thing for him. Liked to be different. Didn't want to be one of the crowd. I suppose I think about the way he was two people. The one person who could be so much fun and kind and thoughtful, and the other person who was full of anger and rage. And he had always had temper tantrums from the time he was very little. He was 7 before his sister arrived in the family. He was delighted to have her. But by the time his brother was born, having 2 younger children in the family, I think was difficult for him. And as they grew older, there were times when he could be super to them. We moved a lot when Michael was small because his father was either a student or a clergyman. And I felt it was hard for him because each time we moved, he had to make new friends. Start over again. I think that's a hard thing to do. Michael was 12 when we were divorced, and as far as he was concerned, divorce was wrong. He couldn't see any gray ground in between. It was either black or white.
And Michael's father? He's an Anglican priest in a small Canadian community. Looking back, he's also begun to pick out some of the threads that link these stories. A young person's isolation, his unvoiced depression.
Michael found it extremely difficult to express any emotion. He found it difficult to hear the words, "I love you." He found it difficult to express any deeply felt emotion, and especially anger. Anytime he expressed anger, it was always directed towards himself. There were times when he would literally bang his head against the wall in frustration and anger at himself. I think that for Michael to be demonstrative about anything was, to him, a sign of weakness. He didn't find certitude. He didn't find perfection. He didn't find the world a place of absolutes, of truth, beauty, and justice. And those things he found were not there. And in his model, in his construct, they had to be there. The analogy that I think of is a child on a beach, let's say, very small, building sandcastles. And the child knows that if a wave comes in and washes the sandcastle away, it doesn't matter. You can build another one. But what seems to happen at adolescence is that, at least in Michael's case, he wanted those sandcastles to be cast in stone. And when the bogeyman, unintentionally, or at least just didn't seem to care, would trample on those sandcastles and destroy them, he could see they were not cast in stone. And his fantasies about reality were then destroyed along with that.
He wanted people to like him. He's very loving, very, very gentle with people. He wanted to be liked, and
Adolescents didn't accept him, whereas some adolescents did. But he found most of his acceptance amongst older people.
he was very sophisticated in the way that he dressed, in the way that he talked, smoking a pipe, carrying a walking cane, and wearing a fedora. He was very sophisticated.
We often talked about forming an immortality club because we wanted to live forever, so we could organize things the way we wanted them to be organized. The raising of children, institutions, abolishment of the family, religion, and all other institutions, in keeping with our philosophy of anarchy. Right?
Yes, I never agreed with much of it. I used to get rather angry with them, but that's the way they pictured things. He used to like to listen to classical music. He used to like for me to play the piano for him. Whenever I sat down, he'd ask for one. He'd say, "Oh, play the little fugue," and he'd put his hands out and shut his eyes again and smile. I miss his presence. I think we both do.
I miss him an enormous amount.
Michael's decision to die was firm. Many who attempt suicide are less sure. They drift into it, often with a less than fatal overdose of drugs. That's what happened to Anna when she was 16. Now, at 20, she can look back.
Growing up in the family I grew up in was a little more difficult, I think, because there were two cultures involved. One being Canadian, being raised in Toronto, and the other being raised in a somewhat typical Italian family. And I guess a lot of the problems came from the lack of communication because of those two cultures. Being Canadian sometimes, being Italian sometimes, and then being female, which was a real drag in an Italian family because it's very different than here. There were a lot of old-fashioned kind of views and stuff like that. And you're supposed to have all these problems in adolescence, and adolescence doesn't exist in Italy. Trying to tell them that you're growing up now, you are not a kid anymore, and you want to do things on your own, and you want to have some freedoms. I guess at about 12 or 13, it felt like life was just getting too restricted. Typical teenage stuff, you know, not being allowed to go out, problems with curfews. Weren't allowed to do a lot of the stuff that the guys were allowed to do. I couldn't find a way to deal with that constructively, deal with any of the problems or communicating, so I just basically clammed up. And that really upset them because I totally isolated myself. I became an incredible bitch. I just went up to my room as soon as I walked in the door from school, and I would not see them until I yelled downstairs at 11 or 12, good night. And then I developed an ulcer, which supposedly meant at that time that it was just keeping it inside and that kind of stuff. And then I started to see a therapist for those reasons. At that point, I was being given a lot of Valium from the doctor because she didn't know what to do with a 14-year-old girl who had a potentially bleeding ulcer. We couldn't talk anymore. I wasn't talking at all to them. I was being really bitchy. I was being verbally abusive when I did talk. That kind of stuff was happening. I didn't see that then. I thought I was definitely right with everything I was doing. But what happened was I was given an ultimatum, which I don't know if they even thought it was an ultimatum. Basically, it was in the heat of anger one night. They said, shape up or ship out. And I thought about it, and I think they meant it to be a heat of anger kind of thing, just something you say. So about a week later, I went down to them, and I think it was bad. It was definitely bad timing. It was 2 weeks before Christmas, which is when my birthday is, and I said to them that, you remember the ultimatum you gave me? Not in those words, they wouldn't know what it meant, but you told me to shape up or ship out, and they put a grin on their face like, great, she's come around. And I said, well, I'm shipping out. So I left. I basically left. I left on the 29th of December, 4 days after being 16. And it was pretty bad. It was 2 workers from the agency that I was hooked up with came to help me move, and basically I was told that whatever I took then was what I got. So I took as much as I could of all my stuff and gave the keys back and was told never to come back or call. And I think I was basically in shock. And so I basically just started taking pills one night and drinking and taking more pills and drinking and that kind of thing. And they weren't working. I really wanted to go to sleep, was what it felt like then. And it didn't work. And I got really frustrated, so I took more. And I don't remember thinking that night, yes, I'm going to kill myself. You know, I remember just basically the thoughts going through my head were, I'm really tired. I've had it. I can't catch up to school anymore. Nobody really cares anyway. Why should a stupid therapist care? If my parents don't care, why should anybody else? I'd had some run-ins with them, calling them and them saying, who are you? Your daughter, we don't have one. That kind of stuff, and I just basically felt like, I don't need this anymore. If this is what it's going to be like, who needs it? Did I want to die? God. I don't know. I didn't want to live. I mean, there was nothing to live for. I couldn't see anything to live for. I don't know. It's to say that I wanted to die sounds strong.
Anna came through that night 4 years ago with the help of friends and her therapist. She persisted with therapy, studied psychology at university, and now works in a group home helping adolescents sort out their problems.
I'm still definitely struggling for my independence, trying to get what I want from people, getting the help I want when I want it, getting the good times when I want it, balancing it out like that.
Put it on the gas?
Yeah.
Put on the brake.
And I know that that's hard, even in my relationship right now. I'm constantly battling and saying, well, I need you to prove to me that you care. And he'll say, well, how do you want me to prove that to you? Well, I don't know, just do it.
Okay, first gear. So if I'm in neutral, I go up. Is that right?
Maybe. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, now what?
Okay, lift the clutch slowly. Good, you're done. Beautiful.
Oh, right. I can't take this. Now my foot stays off the clutch?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, steep, narrow hill. Slow. All right.
Slow.
Okay. Well, you're doing fine.
Oh my God.
You're doing
Look
fine.
at the
Okay,
hill. Why do I always get these signs saying steep, narrow hill or
Just
go
lucky,
at own
I
risk?
guess. Lucky.
In our society, for people under 25, the suicide rate is now 4 times what it was only 20 years ago. And for each person who kills himself, at least 50 more make one or several attempts, perhaps with other motivations. Today, where do you look for any sense of direction? Any feeling that you have some control over your own future? How can you be surrounded by people and still feel alone? Most do get through. For others, it may be hard. Sherri is 15. She's made 2 attempts on her life. Her feelings of helpless isolation began at home, in affluent, middle-class suburbia.
The house itself was nice. I had pretty well everything there I wanted except for the family part of it. I found that the family was what I needed more than the swimming pool and the extras. I would have preferred to live in a dumpy area and at least have parents that would understand and listen to me, and instead of cutting me up all the time. My mother would listen in on phone conversations and read my mail or things like that, and I felt that at home I had had no privacy, and everything that I felt or I'd written down or was talking about, she knew about. In our house, anger wasn't a thing you could go around displaying. If I started getting mad at my mother, my father would come in and start saying, "You're upsetting her," and not to do that. And I was feeling so uncomfortable and so angry at them that that's where I spent all of my time, would be in my room, writing poetry or things like that. What's a door without a key? Locked up dreams. What's a rose without its petals? Beauty ended. What's a lion without its roar? It's a coward. What's food without hunger? What a waste. What am I without a friend? I'm just lonely. What's the night without the moon? Dark and empty. What's a bed without a pillow? Restless sleeping. What's a rainbow without the pot of gold? Wishful thinking. What's the world without people? Strange and silent. What's my life without freedom? It's just dead. What will be? I don't know, 'cause I've got nowhere to go. And what was has now ended. It can't be mended. But what is today is just a long, long way from tomorrow.
Sherri's private childhood depression finally broke out. She ran away.
I was running anywhere as long as it wasn't at home. I'd gotten to the point where I hated it so much I didn't care where I was going. I just left and didn't turn back. Most of the time I ran with a friend of mine. She had problems at home at the same time. I ran quite a few times, and in February we ran for the last time for 3 weeks and had gotten caught coming back. And I'd refused to go home at that point and was sent to a foster home. After a while I felt like I was back at home, and I was boxed in again and couldn't go anywhere, couldn't talk to anybody. And I started getting really nervous, and I just decided that I couldn't live anywhere happily because I was under 16 and I couldn't go anywhere. So I had a friend in the group home that was feeling similar, and we just decided that to die would be a lot happier than to live. The first time we tried to commit suicide, we took a bunch of pills, which just made us sick because we didn't have enough. And the next time she had left that night, and I had pulled out a razor blade and was slitting my wrist with it, and they caught me doing that. At the time of my second attempt, I thought of death as a way out of my problems, of the feelings I had had about life itself, that it wasn't worth living anymore, that I couldn't find the understanding and what everybody says is supposed to be so wonderful. My parents never mentioned once about my suicide attempts or my runs. It was like they happened, but they didn't exist anymore. And that I had a problem, but they never really talked to me about any of the things that happened. I just sort of went my way, they went theirs, and they didn't seem to want to talk about it. I guess it was too hard for them, and they probably knew it was too hard for me, so they never really brought the issues up about any of that.
Sherri's still trying to find just where she fits in. She got help at a treatment center for adolescents, and now she's about to enter a new foster home, one she's visited and likes. The hard part now is to find what works for her, to find the other options. More suicide attempts are made by girls, but most young people who actually kill themselves are boys. During Michael's last year of high school, he signed himself into a psychiatric hospital. But by then, nothing worked for him, not even professional help. His depression had become so private, so inaccessible. He could see only one way out.
He tried to kill himself several times. I suppose we should have seen them as serious indications of what he was considering, but somehow when someone tries so many times and doesn't succeed, I think you put your concern drops off with each one. The first time that he told me that this was his intention, I guess I started to cry or something, and 3 days later I got a letter saying he changed his mind because he didn't realize it would upset us as much as it did. I guess he really didn't think we cared, and when he found out that we did, it was enough to change his mind. We should have been around more at the end to change his mind.
In talking to him about those attempts, he would never say, he might say things like, I hate my life, or I'm terribly depressed, I feel sick and tired of living, or things like that. But he would never do them in any different kind of voice than I just used right then. We just had a discussion, but we never really got into what was really going on.
He used to talk about detachment. Remember he'd stand on the other side of a room and watch himself going through the motions of living, and
yes, he did that. He did describe that.
He had some sort of contempt for that figure that he watched. He didn't think enough.
But the thing is, who was doing that watching is what I always asked him. And what is he like? And isn't that part of you? Well, in the final last 2 months, it sounded as if it was just a downward moving elevator, and every success and every bit of hope just was like a temporary reprieve to him. If he would have got through the next 1 or 2 years, he would have sailed through life very successfully and very happily, I think.
His method was to hang himself, and he could have stopped what he was doing at any point just simply by putting his feet down. So it was certainly deliberate, and certainly knew the finality of it. No question about that. I got the news by telephone at about 3 in the morning, and my reaction was one of sadness. It wasn't unexpected. I had always hoped that he would never follow through, and my first reaction was, oh shit. That's a loser word, and that's exactly how I felt at that point. Just, it's lost. The game is lost. All the effort, all the love, all the care, everything hasn't worked. It's lost. It's easier now for me to get through periods of time where I'm not really conscious of Michael no longer being on this earth. And there are also periods of time when I go into deep depressions and have intense feelings of sadness all over again about that. That may continue for the rest of my life. I don't know. I really can't say what was going on inside his head except for what he said in his notes that he left. And his note, instead of being addressed in anger and expressed in anger, as previous ones had been, were addressed to his newfound friends, and was concerned about them, their reaction to what he was planning to do, and was really a very loving note, as opposed to the angry ones from before. He ended up his note by saying, I never felt better in my life. He had that kind of confident state at that point.
I felt very betrayed when he died. I was not only very saddened, but I felt really let down, I suppose. It's hard to reconcile the Michael that we knew as a friend and who was generous and gave everything he could to you with an act of such selfishness and such egotism. It's hard to remember him as he was when you consider what he did and why I'm having to remember him at all.
That it's an act of incredible egotism is a truism. It's something that can't be denied. But when one's suffering, when one has their legs cut off and is in pain, who do you think about? You think about yourself. And it's hard to shift that focus when you're suffering and in pain. And
I don't think he realized, I guess at the end, just how much we did care. And
it's insanity. It's its own world, impregnable own world. And whatever happened in that own world, I think is excusable. And we can't understand it from our perspective, from our point of view. You can only understand him and you can only accept him from how he was when we knew him, not in that last final time. I did not see him that often. And I can't forgive myself for that.
I was supposed to go and visit, and I was supposed to do this and that, and I never got around to it. You never do get around to these things. I mean, if he were alive today, I wouldn't see anything wrong with the way I'd behaved, but it's the fact that he's not.
I like to create fantasies and illusions that he's still alive somewhere, been recruited by some secret organization.
I think you go through all that. I waited for...
By the KGB or the CIA.
After he died, I had heard that in his note there was no mention made of his parents or of us, and I managed to persuade myself that sometime before he did this, after he'd made the decision, he must have written us a letter and explained it and at least said goodbye or you're not to blame. Something that I think had to be said if we were to try to accept it less painfully, but I'm still waiting for the letter. It never came.